Final Fantasy Tactics is a strategic or tactical JRPG released back in 1997 for the original PlayStation, and it was one of the earliest games in this genre. Before I played Final Fantasy Tactics, my favorite game in the strategic JRPG genre was probably Fire Emblem VII, The Blazing Blade, for Game Boy Advance. I still think this is a phenomenal game, and probably my favorite, but I could easily call Final Fantasy Tactics a close second place, and I understand and respect fully how influential and high quality this game is. Let me start reviewing this game by addressing the story, and I won't say too much in the same way this game doesn't say too much. Its story is told efficiently, it doesn't waste too much of the player's time. Cutscenes and dialogue between characters explaining the situation of whatever's happening in the game don't go on too long. They know when to stop. The game knows when to let you play. And that's good, because games in this genre are kind of famous for having very long, drawn-out battles. The story themes of Final Fantasy Tactics include nihilism, tragedy, betrayal, and to a great extent, the struggle for redemption from all of these forces. I personally related a lot to at least one character who voiced a lot of disenfranchisement and disenchantment with the institutions in the world of this game and how corrupt they are. The world of Ivalice, though it's a fantastical one, is not an idealistic world. It's full of corruption and impure motives and people trying to exploit others for their own gain, and it very much parallels what we see in our own real world outside of video games. As someone who's personally experienced a number of betrayals and instances of being used unfairly in the last 2 or 3 years of my life, this resonated with me quite a lot. One other remark I can make on the story of this game is that it has a nice balance between dry, sort of boring politics between kingdoms and all the intrigue between who inherits what and what people are getting impressed by who, with fantasy, really out there, imaginative fantasy. So it has the kingdom politics counterbalancing the fantasy, and early on you might feel the politics are getting a little too lengthy and boring, but keep playing this game and you will be rewarded with some fantasy coming to make the politics a little more refreshing and interesting, and to remind you that you are playing a Final Fantasy game. Final Fantasy Tactics also has a very large cast of characters that tell its story, and the interactions of all these characters are complex, nuanced, and realistic. They're very real and human. You feel the emotions of scenes between characters that are family members, and a lot of them are very powerful. This is a mature game, for sure. Might be rated teen, but it's mature in its themes and the way it shows its character interactions. The cast of characters in this game is also very large. I would say comparable to Fire Emblem games I've played. Many NPCs talk in the dialogue scenes, and many characters come and go throughout the journey of playing. The characters also receive a decent amount of character development, at least the few that you see and interact with most. The gameplay loop of Final Fantasy Tactics consists of selecting locations on an overworld, and all the things you do occur at these locations. There are 2 types of locations. One would be cities or towns where you can shop for items or equipment for your units to outfit them. That's important to do, as it is in many RPGs, to keep your troops strong. And there's also a bar where you can hear rumors about what's going on in the game world. And that's mainly useful for just hearing what's going on in case you waited too long since you last played the game and forgot what was happening. At the other type of location, which are battlefield locations, you will be engaging in combat. The strategic, grid-based combat that games in this genre are so well known for. Some locations where you can get into battles appear as green circles on the map, and those are spots where you can have a random battle initiate just by random chance as your units are moving across the map. And then there are what appear as orange or red circles, and these signify where your next story destination is that is critical to advancing the game's story. My journey across Ivalice, getting into battles, and seeing various interesting story cutscenes was mostly linear, although I definitely encountered at least one or two places where I had an option to get into a battle or ignore it, and I made a choice, and I'm kind of unsure to what extent that had an effect on the story. But there's a little bit of choice in the story at least. At the locations where random battles can be initiated, when a battle does initiate, you will be met with a collection of monsters that are level scaled to be competitive with your troops. At least that's what I always found as I advanced through the game. Seemed like they were always keeping up with me. The objectives in the battles of Final Fantasy Tactics are generally pretty simple. Usually you just have to defeat all your enemies, or one specific enemy who acts as a boss of sorts. Despite this, I found the gameplay to be quite varied and fun, and I never got bored with it, even across many different battles, due to the variety of enemies you face, who have different abilities you have to counter with all sorts of different strategies, and also the environments, which are very well done. The maps in Final Fantasy Tactics are not extremely big, but they do pack a lot of variety. There are a lot of urban obstacles, a lot of different buildings for you to work around and crawl over as you do battle with your foes, and also many natural features like trees, rocks, and bigger things like mountains and rivers and waterfalls. You see a lot, and it makes each battle unique and interesting in its own way. I need to address the difficulty of this game because I did find it to be one of the hardest JRPGs that I've played. It took me a long time to learn its systems and get better at the battles, and for, I would say, the first 15-20 hours, I struggled a lot and was not having the best time. It was to a great extent due to just not knowing the systems of the game well and not using all the systems well on account of not knowing them well. Much like the Xenoblade Chronicles games, you need to use every advantage at your disposal in Final Fantasy Tactics, or you're going to struggle and probably be met with a few game overs. I got a lot of game overs in the early hours of the game in particular, but also a few later on, because some grueling, challenging battles await you if you play to the end of this game. Final Fantasy Tactics delivers a monstrosity of JRPG customization. It advertises this on the back of the case. It says 19 character classes, 400 abilities, deep customization options, and it shows some of the jobs at the bottom there that you can experiment with. Those are the classes. This game has a marvelous amount of customization, and that is something that I've grown to love about JRPGs of all types. The richness of customization in Final Fantasy Tactics is right where it should be in the characters that you train and bring with you on this epic fantasy war journey across Ivalice. The customization starts right from the beginning when you can name your own character, decide on a class or a job for them to pursue and begin getting experience in, and you take a total of 5 characters, usually, into every battle, and you have control over what jobs these characters have, what their name is when you initially create them at least, and also a host of abilities that they use, and the way units grow and are able to use and earn new abilities is done remarkably well in this game. In addition to experience points that your units will earn in battle as they perform actions and defeat enemies, they also have job points, and this is a critical addition to this game's systems that allows you to earn experience doing specific actions specific to particular jobs And that's how your characters advance and develop their abilities. They get job points. Job points are a bit more important than experience points in this game. As your characters earn job points, you can then spend these in menus for each unit, wherein you can unlock new abilities. So you can have a wizard, and that wizard might learn a few wizard abilities or spells, and later you can set the wizard skill to that character when they have a different job, and they can use a combination of skills from the wizard job and, say, time mage or summoner. You can make combination hybrid characters in this game that have qualities of different classes. I made a summoner who had some qualities of more physical jobs, like the ability to weapon guard like a knight, and the ability to move a few extra paces on the battlefield like a thief. It was tremendous fun for me to customize each unit and make each one a little different from the others to fulfill niches on the battlefield and be useful in their own unique ways. And there are way more abilities in this game than you'll be able to learn and utilize in one playthrough. This is a game that is bursting with replay value because it has unlimited options for the player to explore and combine and experiment with. I didn't even uncover all the classes or jobs available to try out in my first playthrough, because the way jobs are discovered in this game is that you have to level up a few specific jobs to then see later more advanced jobs that are linked to those and require them as prerequisites to then advance in those jobs. So the jobs you unlock kind of build on the initial ones that you choose for your characters to develop. And experience is everything, just like in real life. You learn by doing. Your units have 5 different ability slots, and I'll explain that one of those is set in stone and linked to whatever job they hold, and job can be changed at any time, by the way. Another slot is sort of a freebie wildcard that you get to pick and choose from among the job skills you've already mastered in other jobs. That's how your character becomes kind of a hybrid character. And then there are 3 other slots below those, one of which is sort of a passive ability, one of which is a more active one, and one of which is something that applies to your character's movement on the field and affects it in some way, whether it be recovering MP as they move a few steps, or being able to move a few more spaces, or climb higher up vertically than other units to get places where other people can't go. Due to the branching complexity of this game's job system, I was not able to discover and use every single job. However, I can say that of the jobs I did experiment with, a few of them were disproportionately more useful than others. The biggest one that I found to be more useful than others is the summoner job. Summoning in this game is incredibly effective, and arguably way more effective than any other kind of magic. When comparing it to the wizard's magic, for example, a wizard's black magic in this game will affect all units on the battlefield, including your allies, and friendly fire is therefore a risk in using it. But summoning spells that damage your enemies specifically will single them out and only target them even when an ally is mixed into a crowd of enemies. This single difference makes summoning extremely useful in this game, and one could argue maybe even a little overpowered. Now, one gameplay element Final Fantasy Tactics has in common with the other strategic JRPG I adore so much, Fire Emblem 7, is permanent death. This game will permanently kill your characters if you don't revive them in time, so let me elaborate a bit more on that and how that works. Basically, when a character's hit points in this game reach 0, they'll slump over for 3 turns and not be able to do anything, hanging on by a thread to life. And within those 3 turns, you will be required to use a Phoenix Down or some kind of spell that revives them, or they will be lost forever. They won't come back in the next battle. If you do successfully revive them in that 3-turn time limit, then they will be able to resume actions in that battle and As long as time doesn't expire on them completely dying, you can also leave them dead and have the battle end and they'll come back in the next battle. I really like the way this was handled. It gives you a little buffer against losing them forever. It's not quite as brutal as Fire Emblem 7, in which you have a character's hit points reach 0 and they're gone. But I really enjoy permanent death here, just as I did in that game. It made every battle more exciting and more interesting to have something at risk. The stakes were heightened by having permanent death, and the game was more thrilling as a result. The job system and magic spells and abilities that appear in this game are all very consistent with Final Fantasy as a franchise, so you'll recognize spell names from other Final Fantasy games, and the extensive and well-developed job system in this game is very much inspired by Final Fantasy V, one of my favorite Final Fantasy games. Things like the Time Mage, or the Black Mage, which is a wizard in this game, or the White Mage, which is a priest in Final Fantasy Tactics. I did spend a bit of time level grinding as I played through Final Fantasy Tactics, and I felt this was most necessary for me early on as I was trying to learn the game and struggling to play it well. So I spent maybe 5 to 10 hours level grinding, but I didn't have to do it too much. I wouldn't call that too excessive in a 50-hour playthrough. Early on, I level grinded in kind of a boring fashion, where I just started as many battles as I could and went through the motions, defeated all my enemies pretty quickly. But later on, I discovered a far more efficient and fun way to level grind, or grind for job points, at least, in this game. And it goes something like this. In a given battle, I would always take one unit who can turn foes into a frog with the frog spell, which you can find in the wizard class skills, and I would find and target the unit of my enemies who is most susceptible to this frog spell. You can look at the percentages before you try it out. I would turn them into a frog, sometimes requiring multiple attempts, but I would do it with, determination. And at that point, it's just a process of systematically defeating all non-frog units, leaving that one frogged unit left. And then I would surround the frog with all my magic-wielding characters, usually on 3 or 4 sides, to trap them. And I would let them then take turns beating the frog to death with their blunt weapons, usually like rods and staves, that kind of thing. And magic-wielding characters don't do much damage, so it takes a long time to kill the frog this way, and it maximizes how many swings they successfully get to make it the frog, as they slowly beat it into a slimy paste. And you can get a lot of job points this way. It takes a long time, but you get a lot of job points. And eventually, you smash the frog into the ground and the battle ends. And you get the reward of inflicting that sadistic punishment on an enemy who previously tormented you earlier in the battle. It's great. This game gets huge points for this, for me being able to do this. There are limitations on how many units that you can have in your army, and only about 5 of those units are ever going to be used in battle, so the vast majority of your 15 to 20 or so you might have total will probably not be used much. I myself only cycled between using about 6 or 7 different units, and all of them were ones I trained from scratch, starting from the basic Squire class. The player is provided a few units that can join up with the army they lead throughout the game, and some of those units did seem to be pretty powerful, but I just stuck with using my own home-trained units for the extra reward of doing so. Visually, I think Final Fantasy Tactics is quite strong. Animations for most of the magic and summoning spells you use are quite flashy and fun to look at. I could argue that the environments are the least impressive thing about the visuals. Any battlefield in this game won't be rendered very much in the distance. The battlefields are kind of floating islands with blank, solid colors beyond those. So that can break the immersion a little bit, but I have no problem using my imagination to fill in the gaps in this game. The original PlayStation had some of the best sprite work in video game history. I saw that when I played Castlevania Symphony of the Night, and I saw it again when I played this game. The sprite work is fabulous. Even though the character sprites in this game are pretty small, they're very well animated. They express a lot in the way they move, and you can even see little expressions on their faces at times. Regarding the audio of this game, I don't have a ton to say, but what I do have to say is pretty positive. The sound effects have a lot of punch and definition to them. They sound pretty good. Don't really have any complaints there. And the soundtrack is an epic, sweeping, bombastic, sort of classical orchestrated soundtrack. It fits this game's epic fantasy theme well, and the only thing I could say in criticism of it is maybe it uses some tracks repeatedly too much. Maybe the soundtrack could be a little bigger and more varied, but the tracks themselves are well developed and of good length. Even though this is an exceptional JRPG overall, it does have a few flaws or things that I thought could be done better, and part of that's just due to its great complexity. With great complexity comes being kind of inaccessible and hard to understand, and the game doesn't explain all of its systems as well as it could. One thing that wasn't well explained was how job points are divided among your units. I noticed that units I didn't spend any time holding a certain job often got job points in that job. And I deduced this was happening due to some kind of spillover from other units and their jobs being developed. Somehow, job points were being shared to an extent. But exactly how it was happening, I couldn't figure out. I couldn't figure it out by referencing the manual. There are tutorials in the game, in the menus you can reference, although I didn't thoroughly go through all of those because they were kind of slow. Another criticism I have is that too many of the actions you can take in battle are linked to statistic probabilities in a way that impedes your success performing a variety of actions. It can be a little frustrating. Basically what happened again and again is I would spend a lot of time making sure my characters learned abilities that required a lot of job points and a lot of investment of time and effort, and then later when I would try to finally use those spells in battle, I found over and over again spells that had percentages of success below 50%, and it was frustrating to see those spells fail over and over again after spending a lot of time and effort to unlock them. Probabilities are very common as a determinant for actions in JRPGs and RPGs generally, but I just thought the actions in this particular game were a bit too dependent upon statistics. Too many times, my success in battle felt like it was dependent on a coin flip. And that resulted in a lot of game overs and resetting battles to enter them again, just because I had bad luck. Another critique I would make of Final Fantasy Tactics is that as you're setting up before a battle begins, you have an opportunity to place your units in specific positions. However, you place them in those positions totally blind to what the rest of the battlefield looks like. So you'll see squares that represent some location on the battlefield you're about to engage, but you won't know where you're placing them on that battlefield until the battle starts. It makes the setup kind of blind for each battle, and there isn't really any immersive sort of reason or gameplay reason why you would want that decision to be blind. It makes sense to me that before any battle, units or soldiers would be planning where they want to be and sizing up the terrain and the enemy units to decide where they want to be positioned. It just doesn't make sense why the player has to be ignorant to where their units are being placed every battle. Fire Emblem does not suffer this problem. In conclusion, Final Fantasy Tactics is an exceptional strategic JRPG. It's definitely very influential in its genre. I can see that now that I've finally played it. And I would call it required gaming for any JRPG fan, but particularly if you like JRPGs where your units are set up on the battlefield like a chessboard. Play it if you love Final Fantasy, play it if you love fantasy generally, and play it if you want a good challenge. In one of the later battles, I even brought my Oracle along, and after the singled out enemy had been turned into a frog and we were beating it to death, I had my Oracle also turn the frog into a zombie, so it was a zombified frog being beaten to death. Imagine that as a way to go. All your friends are killed in front of your eyes, and then you're turned into a frog, beat to death a bit, then turned into a zombie, so you're a zombified frog, and then the last beating to death, you're just a zombie frog. How's that? How's that as a way to die? Final Fantasy Tactics.